On September 27th, Hurricane Helene ravaged western North Carolina, causing widespread destruction across the greater Asheville area. 5 local musicians banded together to raise money for aid, and the Caverns of Gold music compilation was born. 280 performers are featured on the compilation. Each episode of this podcast goes in depth with the artists that brought their gifts to this compilation to help Western Carolina. I'm your host, Kelly Minnis, and this is the Caverns of Gold podcast. Asheville trio John Kirby and the New Seniors blends old-school pop metal licks with the wild-eyed abandon of Minneapolis punk rock and the songwriting chops of skinny tie 1980s power pop. Fans at live shows are treated to 3-part harmonies, guitar pyrotechnics, and a loud rock and roll good time. I spoke to singer-guitarist John Kirby about the band's origins, John's upbringing in a music nerd's home, and how a chance phone call aided his Hurricane Helene recovery. What is your first musical memory?
Man, okay, first thing that comes to mind when I was like, I must have been 4, 5, maybe 5, 6 years old. My dad was playing Richard Thompson. And in the living room, I remember he put a CD in a CD player, and I remember being fascinated with the disc tray coming out. I thought it was the coolest thing in the world, and put a CD in. And I remember it was Cook's Fairy Queen. He had that on, and I don't know, that one like stuck in my head of like the first time I ever like heard music and like really like was like, oh, this is really cool. And yeah, I think that was probably the first like musical memory I've ever had, my dad playing that.
So if that's the first musical memory that you ever had, you must have grown up in a very interesting household, because I don't think that a lot of people would have Richard Thompson as their first musical memory. So
Yeah. My dad worked at a record store for like 25 years in the Boone Mall. So he always had music playing, like, and always had friends coming over. Like, actually, John Hawkins was one of my dad's like best friends working at the music store. So he'd have Hawkins over all the time, and man, it was always just some new stuff being played. He was really into Bob Dylan, Richard Thompson, really like the Soft Boys. It was just like everything, you know.
if Dad was a record store guy, was Dad a musician too?
So yeah, he my dad plays tenor guitar. So it's like 4 strings and it's a much smaller scale. And he does like, he kind of plays more like what do you call it? It's not bluegrass, it's like Doc Watson songs, Mississippi John Hurt, kind of stuff like that. Some Hank Snow, some Hank Williams, but with tenor guitar. And he had a mandolin player and another guitar player who would play with him. So they get together and play like once or twice a week. Sometimes it was like, so either dad had music going on at the house or dad was out playing with his buddies a lot. And so
this was in Boone, right?
Yep, Boone, North Carolina.
So at what point did you decide that you were going to take this up as well?
Okay, so I first started out, must have been 4th grade. So I heard music. I wasn't really into music. Like, I thought it was cool, but like it hadn't become my thing. It was my parents' thing. You know, it was my dad's thing, him and his buddies. I was still trying to figure out where I was with all of this. And I remember when I was about to be in 4th grade, my parents asked me, like, would you like to play a musical instrument? And my original pick was the sax. I wanted to play the tenor sax. But in school, they wouldn't let us play. You had to be in 5th grade to be a part of band. But in 4th grade, I had the option. They're like, but you can take violin or a stringed instrument if you want to go ahead and, take classes in music. And so I was like, okay, I'll play violin. So I started out with violin till about 8th grade, and I liked it, but I never really fell in love with it. It was really difficult, unfretted instruments. I mean, I didn't have an ear for it. It was really a difficult instrument for me. And it wasn't until I was about 12 or 13 I actually got a guitar for the first time. And that's when everything kind of started falling into place with that.
So at that time, what was your music?
So when I was like 12 or 13, my dad got me an electric guitar and an amp, and I I had it for like 4 or 5 months and tinkered around with it, and I remember it was neat, but I really didn't, like, feel that much. I was like, "This is kinda cool, but I'm not really that into it," until I realized on the amp what the distortion knob did, and I was like, "Oh, cool. Okay. That's doing something." And, my dad got me lessons. That made a huge difference. But again, like, I was still kind of in violin mode. Like, I'd had, like it felt like a chore until one day in my guitar lessons, like, my guitar teacher taught me "Sunshine of Your Love" and taught me bar chords, and all of a sudden, the fact that I could play a song I had heard before kinda blew my mind a little bit. I was like, "Oh, whoa, I'm actually playing the instrument the way I wanted to." Like, and then I started diving into music a little bit more, and I really became obsessed when I learned the intro to Stairway to Heaven. Like, once I learned that, I was like, "Oh, okay. Alright, it's over. I'm doing this all the time now." And I started just going crazy with music. Like, I really and I was at that age where, like, I was kinda everything was kinda crazy. I was in high school. I was a freshman, and, like, I've started becoming obsessed with it. And I started, like, going through my dad's CD collection, and, like, that's when it all, like, really I started asking dad what I should listen to and, kinda point me in the right direction. And also, when I was, like, 14, I had been playing for about a year. I got into my first band. And that changed my entire dynamic in high school. I all of a sudden was way cooler than I was because I was one of the kids that was in the band. No one was in the band at that age, or in school. And I've been in a couple of groups, but not really. Like I played around with a couple of dudes, but I got into a band with one of my buddies, Dylan, and his stepbrother played drums, and we called ourselves the Royals, and it was like Led Zeppelin rock stuff. Like, but we actually recorded our first demo, and after that, man, we were like the coolest thing in high school. Like it was, I like I made tons more friends, and it kind of just became like a way of life at that point. Like I really found my setting and my identity with that. And plus, we got really lucky, and our high school had open mic nights, and so any band that was in high school, you could sign up for an open mic night. And it was like once a month, and it would be like you're playing to like all of the parents of the high school, so like 300-400 people in an auditorium, and it became kind of like you know super gig simulator, and it became like the most important thing with those open mic nights and to get together and practice and try and one up your buddies. I remember it was the Royals and our buddy band Classy Cowboy. And like we would always try and just like learn like a crazy like crazy train or something and try and one up each other. And yeah, man, it just kind of evolved from there like crazy.
It's interesting that almost everyone, knowing that you are at least probably 2 generations removed from classic rock, that our generation, being a little bit older than you, we were all weaned on classic rock too, and that it has kind of become a sort of lingua franca for, even if you look at the students that do School of Rock,
uh
that sort of stuff, that there's no getting away from Zeppelin, The Doors, Hendrix, Deep Purple.
Yep.
That
Yep.
stuff is kind of embedded in the bedrock of what everyone learns, regardless of if they're, an indie rock musician or a hard rock musician or a metal musician or whatever. It's almost like that's a common language.
Well, man, it's songs. They're timeless. A good song, in my opinion, it's like it doesn't matter who writes it. It's remembered for a reason, because it has those elements that stay with you. And there's a reason that people still listen to Led Zeppelin because they're great, and people still listen to Hendrix to this day. Like it still influences people, and even like Nirvana, I guess technically is considered like classic rock these days. But I love seeing the videos of like kids, like 9-year-olds who have like never heard like Nirvana, still like going, "Oh my god, this is amazing," and it's timeless. I mean, like "Come as You Are" could have been written in the '70s, and there's a reason that it stays with people and still influences people to this day.
You mentioned songs. You've been playing in a cover band in high school. At what point did you figure out that you could write them yourself?
Well, we weren't really a cover band. We did covers, but oh man, we wrote some terrible, terrible songs. And but that was like what I loved. What was a dynamic that always worked well was I could come up with a good guitar line, and as long as I had like someone who was decent at melody and could like wanted to sing, like I can write with a singer really well, and that was how it was in the first band. Just come up with some cool guitar riffs, and he'd write some mystical shit or whatever, and put it over that, and it always kind of works. You know, I was always a guitar player. I wasn't really like a songwriter as much. I always worked in tandem with someone else. It took like a really long time before I even attempted to do that by myself. I think I was like 2021 before I actually tried to write my own songs. And I was always a guitar player first, a gun for hire, or I really wanted to be like Jimmy Page. And it took a while to kind of come out of my shell on that, and I'm still working on that. Like I still am super. It's never good enough in my book, but you have to go do it.
When did you make the move down to Asheville?
2015, I had moved from Boone to Chicago as I wanted to start a band, and I wanted to move to the city, try out the city for a little while, see how that went. And I was in a couple of bands in Chicago, one band called Dog Brain, and that was my main thing for a while, and was practicing all the time, and it just nothing about Chicago felt like I really needed to be there. It just wasn't for me. I need hills, I need greenery, I need, a bit of seclusion. And so after a couple of years, I was like, all right, I'm gonna move back to Boone and kind of do music as a hobby and just get a job and just hang out hometown, see what happens from there. About 2 weeks after I got back from Chicago, one of my buddies I went to high school with, Steven, he was like, I'm in this band called Dr. Bacon, and they need a guitar player because the guy just got fired. So like I've been back in town for like again like a week or two, and I was like, all right, and I went out and started jamming with those guys. And about 2 months later, they're like, "You want to be a part of the band?" And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." They were getting a ton of shows, and it was by far like the most successful band I had ever been in, or thought about being in. And they, about again 2 months after I got back, they're like, "Hey, we're moving to Asheville. We got a band house. You want to move in and start playing with us?" And I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." And we all like five of us moved in this one house and started playing, and it's been that since 2015. I've been here ever since.
So at what point did you decide to strike it on your own and start up your own band?
That was about 2019, I think. And that was like, again, I've written some of my own things in the past, but never for a long amount of time. Like it was always like a short-lived band where we might write like 4 or 5, 6 songs, playing for a little while, and then something would happen and it would fall apart. But in Dr. Bacon, I just wanted to write something that just was different and that was mine and just kind of how I wanted to do things. So I wrote Don't Say Sorry when I was in Bacon, and we were actually doing that as the band, but the lead singer was singing it. And he always would be like, "You sing it, man. You wrote the song. You wrote the song." I was like, I felt it was weird. I'm not the lead singer in that band. Like, I don't want to just pass it off to here's John's song. I want to look like a cohesive unit. But I did want to try it myself. So I hit up Hawkins and was like, "Do you want to come just learn this song with me and just jam a little bit?" And after he started doing that, like it sounded really really good. And he got Chad on board. And then I was like, "Well, why don't we start just playing together on the side whenever Bacon's not doing stuff. And then one thing led to another, and ended up out of Dr. Bacon into John Kirby and the New Seniors.
So that song started the band, and how did it progress from there? Because obviously there's a whole lot more songs than that.
We basically just played that one a million times, and I think we learned a couple of covers. We did that Dave Edmunds song "Trouble Boys" because we were huge Replacements fans, and that was one of the songs Replacements covered. And we were like, that'd be kind of cool. And love Dave Edmunds, love Dave Edmunds. And man, we just started getting together and just writing and playing, and it just kind of it was more of like the New Singers was always like a break from everything else in the world. You know, whatever we were doing, this was our kind of vacation from that, to go just do something else and just try and be creative on our own. And we just started hanging out all the time, and it just sparked writing other stuff and sitting down, just kind of writing some riffs and trying to make some melodies, and just, just kind of went from there and just try and get together like once or twice a week. And we've been doing it for like 5-6 years now.
Writing as a band, it sounds like.
It depends. We do both. Sometimes I have an idea and it's like, most of the time it's not 100% done. It'll be maybe 50%, 60%. I'll have an idea for at least like 3 parts, like a verse, a chorus, maybe a bridge. I'll have maybe a verse, vocal, verse lyrics and the vocal line written, and maybe a chorus. And sometimes it comes in that way, and then we just play it together, and then afterwards I'll polish stuff. Or we do get together and just jam on stuff and then go, that was cool, what was that, record that, and then just go from there. So it really just depends.
I don't think that there has been a single time that I've ever seen John Kirby and the New Seniors that you haven't played at least a replacement song. If not, for events where you play entire replacement sets.
Yeah.
What is it about that particular band that has influenced you like they have?
Man, the Replacements are just the most rock and roll band ever in my book. The thing about the Replacements are it's kind of like, it's why I like the Clash. They're so punk that they're themselves 100%. And that's all that matters at the end of the day. They're not one thing. They are themselves. And they don't have one sound. They have whatever song they want to write, And the looseness of it, the idea that they're not perfect, that they you get what they are in that moment, and they're proud to give it to you like that, And I just think it's real. I always felt like the Replacements, I could relate to some dudes just doing whatever the fuck they want to do that night. Sometimes they don't even want to play their own songs. They just want to play covers. I mean, sometimes they don't even feel like playing, but they're going to do it anyways. And they're just going to try and have the best time they can with it. And I love that, the idea of like, we're entertainers, but we're people, and we're not trying to be perfect by any means. We're trying to do it just the way we do it. And we know that works. And that always just struck me as like so genuine, authentic. And I love it. And I mean, dude, there's amazing songs. Paul Westerberg is like one of the greatest lyricists in my book of all time. And Tommy Stinson is like that duo. Like, they just knew what needed to happen and they nailed it. And, Chris Mars is an amazing drummer. He really fit the bill like really well with them. And Bob Stinson was absolutely crazy. But I do like the three of them. That, like, when it went after Bob, like, I love Let It Be. That's probably my favorite Replacements album. But I do catch myself like listening to more of like the Pleased to Meet Me, and the really Don't Tell a Soul is like my favorite one that I listen to all the time. Just something about the songs, man. You just see them evolve, become this other thing.
What I find interesting is that you take those sort of bones, but it's quite obvious that the three of you, especially, your rhythm section, those two dudes are definitely old enough to have cut their teeth listening to turn of the 70s into the 80s classic hard rock and heavy metal.
Uh-huh.
And you add definitely more of that sort of edge and musicianship to it, that the Replacements were definitely more ramshackle than the
Yeah.
New Seniors. But there were also a handful of those sort of metal Replacements bands that came up after them, like Dramarama or the Goo Goo
Mm.
Dolls,
Yeah.
who doubled down on becoming more like the late 80s replacements, and then they hit it big. They had the success that Westerberg should have had
Yep.
with the
Yep.
replacements.
I'm so glad you said the Goo Goo Dolls because I love the Goo Goo Dolls. I love those early albums. I really like Dizzy Up the Girl. I think that I actually was listening to that today, and Johnny Resnick, he did get that fame that Westerberg never got. Like Iris was a gigantic song. Oh my god, like that was everywhere, and that was like. It's kind of that led back to the replacements because the Goo Goo Dolls were on the radio when I really got into music. When I was when I was younger and really getting into guitar, the Goo Goo Dolls were on all the time. I remember when they were playing Slide and they were doing it on the radio station with acoustic guitars because it had just come out. And so there was a bit of a nostalgia with that of that I really like that. And then to realize like they were huge replacements fans, that was like, oh, well, that's why I love that too. It all just kind of made sense. And even the Goo
Replacements
Dolls,
contemporaries, in
yeah,
fact. They were doing things at roughly the same time.
yeah. Yeah, they were. And and people like get this idea about the Goo Goo Dolls that they were just these kind of pretty boy acoustic rock stuff. It's like, no, 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 no. Go listen back to their earlier albums. They were punk as shit, dude. They were super rock as fucking rocking band, man. Boy Named Goo, man, like that was some of that stuff was super heavy. I was like really like, damn, this was not the band I thought they were.
These days, you're farming yourself out a little bit, playing in other
Yeah.
bands, kind of going back in a way to what you were doing back in Boone, playing as a gun for hire. Is that like a way of doing research for the new seniors? Is it just a separate outlet? Do they intertwine in any sort of way?
I think I look at it as all separate outlets. I mean, they all influence each other in some way because, I mean, I just like being in as many different mindsets as I can be in. If I think about the same thing for too long, I can, I can obsess about stuff and like I can just get worn out with it. But if I'm in a bunch of different bands and like really trying to just play with a bunch of different people, it keeps me on point a lot more, and it keeps everything almost fresh for me because I'm constantly changing gears and working in different dynamics with people, you know, and because I'm really, man, I'll say I'm like, if I start like, especially in like recording, like I can obsess over something and be like, this isn't right. We have to get this perfect. And I'll do it a million times and it could be perfect, but I've just done it so much that I can't hear it, you know? And the best thing for me to do is to do the best I can, relax, do something else, come back to it. And I find like playing in other groups too, that helps me with that. Because I constantly am like, I love that. I'm going to go over and do this for a second. I love that. Go over and do that for a second, and then come back. And it's kind of like working out how you want to like confuse your muscles. I kind of look at it like that. It's how you build actual mass with it all or whatever.
Goots Animalia is the track that you contributed to the
Mhm.
Caverns of Gold compilation. Can you tell us a little bit about that particular song?
Goose and Amalia is just a word I made up, but I like kind of, I don't know, kind of writing a story with it. So the idea of Guts and Amalia are like you're trapped in the desert and you think you're gonna die, but there's these people who live there and they have resources and they have water, they have transportation, they have like camels and shit, just whatever you need in the desert, and they happen to be there and they save your ass. And I kind of like, when the hurricane happened, I was like, that was one thing that was like, oh man, like we need resources really bad, like we didn't have water, like we didn't have a lot of drinking water for a while, but we ended up obviously getting it, but like just electricity, communication, water, food, like all of that. And I was like, we need our own Kutanamalia right now. And I thought that kind of fit a little bit with what was going on in a loose, weird way.
How did you weather the storm?
So we got pretty lucky, man. We didn't get flooded or anything, but so it was like Saturday morning. I woke up after the storm, and I just kind of realized like the power was out, and I was like, well, that was to be expected. They were saying this was like the worst storm ever, basically. And I, woke up. I was actually supposed to go drive to Boone that day on that Saturday morning right after the storm hit. And I went outside and I hopped in my van and was trying to just go do a drive around real quick. So I'm like, obviously the power's out. It looked like it was kind of rough. And man, I got down like a mile down the road and there were just trees down. It looked like a war zone. And I slowly, I turned around, went back. I was like, okay, this is kind of crazy. I don't know how bad this is. And we had no communication or anything on top of that. So, I talked to my roommate. I was like, hey man, let's go walking around and see what's going on. Like what's up with all of this and, get an idea of what we need to do next. And we're running into people and they're saying, man, power's going to be out for like 2 or 3 weeks maybe. And we're like, oh my God, like really? Like, and then everything kind of, started becoming really real. And we started seeing the damage and how, about quarter mile to a half mile down the road, again, it was like a war zone. There were like cars and trees, and it was just, I didn't realize how horrible it was. And again, we didn't have any news or anything. So we just kind of had to talk to each other and be like, how bad is this? And we hung out for a couple of days with no power or anything. We were very lucky, and we had a creek behind our apartment complex, so we did have water for utilities and all that. But we had no power or anything. We hung out for a day or two, and then we realized we had AM radio in the car, and that was giving us news. And they had said that the mall had cell phone service, and so we all and water. So my roommate had some gas in his car and, enough to where we could go do this and be safe, and went to the mall, and we called our buddy. We started kind of checking in with people to be like, we're okay. And one of our friends in Raleigh was like, hey man, I heard it's like awful there. If there's any way I can come, check you guys out, do you want to come stay with me for like a week or two? And we were like, oh, if you can do that, absolutely. Like that would be amazing. And we said, all right, man, well, he's like, I'm heading that way, and got a bunch of gas, and he drove out and he filled up the car, and we followed him out. We stayed with him for about like 8-9 days and headed back. So we got really lucky on that and got to actually kind of escape a lot of the craziness on it.
Is there anything that you've taken away from that experience?
Well, first thing, man, how easily everything can just be taken down. Like, how if you don't have internet, if you don't have a cell phone, if you get your electricity cut off, like how you're just on your own, and how grateful we should be to have all of this now, because it could so easily just be taken away, in just a second. And I guess in all of this, the biggest thing I take away from all of this is how important community is, and how important knowing your neighbors, and how people will most of the time, man, people help people. People want to make sure everything around them's okay. And that, I think with all of this, community is just such an important resource. And I think we overlook that a lot. And I think it's better, we should spend more time like just saying hey to the people around us and being there if we can do anything to help. Like, I feel like that would make the world a million times better. That's how we got, that helped us so much, man. Just having the neighbors to like, lend us some food if we needed it, or, if a ride, if they had gas. I mean, everyone was just so giving, and it was kind of eye opening.
What's coming up in the near future for the new seniors?
Just kind of doing some gigs, and we got some new songs. Like, we've had some new songs for a while, but we've just been working on cover sets and everything, and just Band the Flood, and that kind of put a wrench in things for a little while with practicing. But we're just gonna start recording soon. It's time. We got about 4 or 5 in the bucket that haven't actually been recorded. They've been played live, but there's no recordings of them. And so I think we're gonna try and put out another EP in the next like 3-4 months maybe.
Folks in the Asheville area can catch John Kirby and the New Seniors live Saturday, February 22nd at Fleetwood's in West Asheville with Starseer and Motto and the Loose Balloons. Find them online at linktree/JK and TNS. Caverns of Gold is hosted and produced by Kelly Minnis, and he wrote and performed the theme music. Caverns of Gold can be found on Facebook and Instagram, as well as at cavernsofgold.bandcamp.com. Thank you for listening.